What is the plan?
For audience questions. Of the event, so I'll get her to come up and you can just sit down.
Tēnā tātou, nei rā taku mihi mata kuikui ki a koutou katoa I hui hui mai nei I tēnei pō. Nuku nuku mai, neke neke mai, ki konei ki te mana whenua o Rangitāne, nei rā te mihi o Rangitāne hoki ki a koutou, I ngā kai hāpai, I ngā kai tautoko, I ngā wārihi Māori, tō reira tēnā koutou. It's my honour, I'm Deputy Marshal Lobb, Deputy Mayor of Palmerston, to welcome you to this very special night. If I look like I've just rushed from somewhere, I have. Some of you may have been there at the Manawatū Horowhenua Secondary School Kapahaka competition, and it was a fabulous event. It was sold out, 2,357 people there, and young people predominantly. And this campaign had been going for 6 months, maybe even 8 months if they started in February. And it's quite tiring really, but it's good. I've had 3 nights at the marae with teenagers. I teach them. They gave me a group of young students who were bouncing off the walls on Wednesday night. Last night they were the first ones asleep. And this morning they woke up and they were ready to go, and they really did themselves proud in their whānau and their iwi. So I've come here tonight really on a high, but in a way quite exhausted. But I'm really delighted to see so many here. Welcome to this important and timely event here in the heart of Te Papaioia, Palmerston North. We gather under a kaupapa which is about education, unity and progress, specifically to kōrero about Māori Wards and their place in our democratic landscape. This is a space for learning, for listening, and for lifting up the voices that have too often been silenced. We acknowledge mana whenua. I've got to be careful here because I'm also Rangitāne, so I'm not mihing to myself, but I'm mihing to our tūpuna, whose enduring presence and stewardship of this whenua remind us that history did not begin with colonisation and that the future must be shaped with partnership, respect and justice. Our wonderful speakers, neira te mihi nui ki a koutou katoa, are bringing to us knowledge, their passion and their lived experience. Their voices are vital, and we are here to listen deeply. To our volunteers and the organisers, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa, I whakapau kaha. You are the backbone of this kaupapa, ensuring that this space remains safe, inclusive and respectful. We are grateful for your mahi. And to you who have come along tonight, thank you for showing that whether you are here to learn, to support, or to challenge your own understanding, Your presence matters. This is an audience, a mainstream audience, yes, but today we ask that you lean into the margins to hear what Māori Wards mean not just in policy, but in practice and in lived reality. Tō reira, tēnā koutou katoa, and I'm just going to start with a karakia for us. Ka tākiri ake ngā haiata o tamanui te rā ki te whenua ki te rāwhiti ka awatea. Ka haukua papatuanuku, ka ngaru e te whenua. Haere mai rangi nui e tū iho nei. Te oha o te rā, te oha o te pō. Haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. And that karakia is about 250 years old. And it is one that acknowledges that in the first thing in the morning, especially at this time of year, there's either dew or frost on the ground. That is a symbol of a certain season, but there's a time for everything, and all the seasons have a place in our lives and hopefully invigorate us. And the day comes, and then the night comes, and it talks about tamanui te rā, te oha o te rā, te oha o te pō, the guardian of the day and the night. And may we be looked after all together. Nō reira, kia ora koutou. Thank you.
Tuatai ake e mihi ana ki a koe, Whaia Debs, mau I whakatūwhera I tō tātou nei hui I te rānei kia rere pai ai te wairua. O tira, e mihi ana ki a koutou kua taima I te rānei ki te whakarongo ki ēnei kai kōrero miharo rau atu. I am so excited to see how many people are here today to hear from these absolutely incredible people who are going to be speaking on a very important kaupapa tonight. I think Whaia Debs has done an awesome job introducing that kaupapa, so I'm very excited for us to hear from our first speaker shortly. My name is Chelsea and I'll be facilitating our kaupapa tonight. I have been told, okay, to let everyone know that they have 10 minutes max, and then Matt's going to go like this when there's 2 minutes left and I'm meant to do something, but I will probably not do anything, to be honest. So please, if you see Matt doing something, do that, because I'll probably be sitting there like, yeah. Ka pai. I'm going to kick us off though. Our first awesome speaker is Professor Richard Shaw. Professor Richard Shaw is a professor of politics at Massey University, where he teaches courses in New Zealand politics and undertakes research on ministerial political advisors. He is also the author of 2 best-selling and critically acclaimed books, The Forgotten Coast and The Unsettled Small Stories of Colonisation, both published by Massey University Press, which explores his own family history and issues of memory and forgetting amongst Pākehā settler families in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Richard will speak about the relationship between diversity, good decision-making, the legitimacy of our political institutions, and the constitutional status of te tiriti. Ka pai, mai te pakipake.
And she reckons I'm going to do that in 10 minutes. Good one. G'day, my name's Richard. I will talk about those things. There might be 1 or 2 other things that I just add as well. On my dad's side, my people were flax workers from Turakina and Te Awahu, Foxton. And on my mum's side, they're dairy farmers from Taranaki, from coastal Taranaki. But I've lived in Palmerston North for virtually my entire adult life. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to come and spend 9.5 minutes talking about the case for Māori Wards. I'm really grateful to everybody who's had a part to play in bringing this together. I'm especially grateful to those of you who've come out on this glorious Manawatū night to sit in this little theatre. There are people who know a lot more about Māori wards and constituencies and the history of Māori parliamentary representation and the presence of Māori in local government, or more particularly the absence of. What I would quite like to do, if it's all right with you, is just aim my comments at people who are a little bit unsure. People who've got questions. I'm not an activist, I'm a pointy head. I work in a university. My job is to help people learn more about things. The thing tonight is Māori wards and constituencies. Let me just talk about Māori wards because that's what we're most familiar with in our City Council. I want to tell you what I think they are. I'd quite like to tell you what I think they are not. And then I want to finish with a couple of comments about treating people differently. I think Māori wards are pretty straightforward, right? They're a geographically defined area within which Māori People enrolled on the Māori electoral roll vote for candidates who represent them and the rest of the city in the city council. That's it. That's all they are. They're exactly the same setup as voters who are enrolled on the general roll get to vote in the general wards or a rural ward. There's no difference really. You can all stand for election in a Māori ward. Every one of you can stand. You don't have to be Māori. You just have to be enrolled on. You need to be a New Zealand citizen. You've got to be on the electoral roll. You don't even have to live here in Palmerston North. You can live anywhere and stand for the Māori roll. So that's fairly straightforward. Unlike the situation that applied, and Chelsea will know more about this than I do, between 1854 and 1967 in this country at the general political level, when Māori were not elected or not legally permitted to stand for election in what were known until 1975 as European seats, unless they had one Pākehā parent. So there has been a history of the exclusion of Māori according to legal rules. Māori wards are about bringing people in, having more people at the table, essentially. Here are some things that Māori wards are not. They are not separatist. Māori wards sit within the existing institutions of local government. They bring Māori in. They don't keep people like me out. Between 1998 and 2019, more than 90% of all elected local authority members around this country identified as New Zealand European, and around about 5% of them identified as Māori. So there is an issue here with our rules, I think. You change the rules and we address the issue. Since 2022, the number of elected Māori representatives across the country has increased from around about 5% to 22%, which sounds about right. They do not amount to privilege. Matt is going to talk about this at greater length than I am. But if you are my mate June and you're on the Māori electoral roll and maybe you vote in the Māori wards here, you don't get to nip out the back and then have another vote. You just get the one vote, same as me, same as everybody else. So it is one person, one vote. That's all fine. What's more, the formula for determining the number of Māori wards is based on the total number of councillor positions up for election minus the mayor's position, and that's compared with the proportion of those on the Māori roll and those on the general roll. So essentially your Māori vote is kind of weighted the same way. So you only get one of them, not lots of them, and they have essentially the same effect on the outcome of the election. So they're not separatist, they're not an expression of privilege, they're not racist. That word gets thrown around all the time, and quite often people really are not entirely clear on what it means. Here's the Oxford English Dictionary's definition of racism. Racism is prejudice, antagonism, or discrimination by an individual, institution, or society against a person or people on the basis of their racial or ethnic identity. Māori wards are quite clearly not an expression of prejudice, antagonism, or discrimination, although there are quite a few people who feel that way about the Māori wards. Māori wards are not apartheid. Let's go back to the Oxford English Dictionary. Apartheid is an institutionalised system of racial segregation and discrimination against particular racial or ethnic groups. This is what apartheid looks like, and some of you who I know more about this than I do. Apartheid looks like constraints on the freedom of movement. It looks like pass laws. It looks like bans on marriage or sex between people from different ethnic communities. It looks like forced ID card carrying. It looks like separate housing, health and education systems. Māori wards don't fit that definition. They are the antithesis of that definition. But we have had pass laws. We got there first in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We got there before the South Africans or anybody else did. We got there in 1881 after the invasion of Parihaka by the armed constabulary, about which I know a considerable amount, having published 2 books on it involving my ancestors, part of the reprisals against the people of Te Whiti Rongamai and Tohu Kākehi with the imposition of pass laws for 4 years. So we know something about pass laws. They don't look like Māori wards either. So these are things that Māori wards are not. They are not racist. They are not apartheid. They are not separatist. They are not an expression of Māori privilege. I think I've got 4.5 minutes left. Who would know? Can I just talk briefly about treating people differently? And maybe we come back to that, because there are quite a lot of ways in which we have historically and still treat Māori differently, and generally that doesn't end well for Māori people. Most of you will know, I think, that the law that has been introduced by the current administration is a reversion to a previous state of legal affairs. What we are going to go back to is the pre-2021 state of affairs, in which a petition signed by 5% of electors in a territorial authority or a regional council was all that was required to trigger a public poll on a proposal to establish the existence of a Māori ward, and the result of the following referendum was binding. Binding referenda are super rare in our country. There'll be others who might be across this to a greater extent than I am. I can only remember one, and I'm about 400 years old. The only one I can remember was the one that happened in 1993 when we changed the electoral system. So that is the only instance in contemporary New Zealand political history in which a binding referenda has been triggered to change the electoral arrangements. But at local authorities, until 2021, you get to do that with 5% of all voters. You can do a citizens initiated referenda if you're dead keen on something, anything. We've had 5 of them, firefighters. But you have to get 10% of registered voters, and the result of that referendum is not binding on the government. So that's one way in which we can treat people differently. And the new law brings all of those things back. So we are returning to an era in which 5% of us can trigger a referendum which will have impact on the arrangements that bring our Māori mates into local authorities, and that decision is binding. And it does not apply to any of the other kinds of wards or constituencies that we have in our system at the local authority level. So we are quite keen on treating people differently. Doesn't always end well for people on the sharp end, in this instance Māori people. I need to wrap up now. 2 last comments. Norman Kirk. It's 1974 and Norman Kirk is standing in the floor of the Parliament down there in Pōneke, Wellington, and he's talking about the notion of integration. Norman Kirk says, "The idea of one people grew out of the days when fashionable folk talked about integration. So far as the majority and minority are concerned, integration is precisely what cats do to mice. They integrate them. The majority swallows up the minority. It makes it sacrifice its culture and its traditions, and often its belongings, to conform to the traditions and the culture of the majority." I find it helpful to reflect on Norman Kirk's words as we have this nationwide discussion that has been forced upon local authorities around the nature of the representation of people in our localities. Last things I want to say are, I think it's a really good idea to listen to people who know what they're talking about. And so I would quite like to end with words which are not mine. They belong to Mayor Grant Smith and to our city's councillors, and I've just plagiarised them completely from the submission that the Palmerston North City Council made to the Justice Select Committee. I don't have time, parenthetically, to talk about the political and legislative process that the Justice Committee went through. I would quite like to talk about it in the Q&A afterwards, if we have time, because it was, and I say this in my professional capacity, a flawed legislative process. Let's just finish by coming back to the Palmerston North City Council submission to the Justice Select Committee, in which the Council explained that councils and communities do not want or need and have not asked for the new law. More to the point, they explained that having a Māori ward works extremely well for Palmerston North. Grant Smith, I am fairly sure, I can say this, he's not a paid-up member of the Wokarati. But these people know what they're talking about because they live it. They know far more about it than I do. So I listen to their words, and what I hear them saying is, nobody loses out from the existence of Māori wards. Nobody is deprived of anything. We're all stronger if we are all sitting around the table. There are real problems to deal with in this country at the moment. But the existence of Māori wards is not one of them. They're part of the solution, They are not part of the problem. Thank you.
Rawe, I think that was such a fitting opener, especially discussing what Māori wards are and what they are not, considering that there's a lot of misconceptions going around at the moment in terms of what Māori wards are, so tēnā koe I au kupu. Up next, we have Hinemoana Durie-Shedlock. Hinemoana is a whānau support specialist and community leader, a descendant of many tupuna, a daughter, a sister, a mother of 4 tamariki, and taua to 5 mokopuna. Her iwi a Rangitāne, Ngāti Kauwhata, Ngāti Raukoa ki te Tonga, Ngāti Porou, Rongo Whakaata, and Ngai Tahu. Hinemoana is committed to ensuring our mokopuna thrive and flourish in a world that recognises, respects, and reflects their culture. Hinemoana will speak about the difference our Māori wards in the MDC region have made over their first 3 years, the mahi of inaugural Ngā Tapuwai o Mātangi Māori Ward Councillor Bridget Bell, and why it is so important that we continue to have our Māori wards. Tēnā koe.
He tu ana e, ki te tihi o ruahine, kia mā rake rake te titiro, I oku whenua toku wai ora e. Tēnā koutou katoa. As Chelsea said, my name is Hinemoana Durie. I'm a descendant of many tupuna from here, and as Chelsea said, from other parts, but in this area particularly, my tupuna have been here for over 500 years. I am from Rangimārie marae, I am from Aorangi marae, I am from Te Hiri marae, I am from Ngāti Raukawa ki te Tonga, and Ngāti Toa. The waiata I just tried to sing was, they were actually words written by my great-grandmother, Kahurautete, as she stood out and looked across the expanse of whenua, looking out from Ruahine. And it talks about the connection that all those hapu and iwi I just mentioned, the connection they have to the whenua. So that's a bit about me. And as Chelsea said, I'm here to speak about the benefits of a Māori ward, but specifically the Manawatū District Council. Whaia Debbie, I know you've been doing great mahi, but I'm really familiar with what Bridget's been doing because I live in Fielding. When Māori wards are under attack, stand up, fight back. When Māori rights are under attack, stand up, fight back. Stand up, fight back. Stand up, fight back. That chant, a few years ago in 2021, the Manawatū District Council gathered to vote on whether or not to create a Māori ward for Manawatū District Council. Ngā Manu Taiko, who were a group of representatives from each marae within the Manawatū District Council rohe, had made a recommendation to the council that they vote yes to a Māori ward because that's what our people wanted, and there were representatives, as I said, of every marae within that rohe. I was at a graduation that day, and unfortunately I can't remember if it was my daughter's or my brother's, but it was somebody's graduation. And I came home after this hui had taken place, and I opened my phone and I had this whole lot of messages telling me that the Manawatū District Council had voted no. A vote of only 4 people had said yes, the rest of the 11 councillors had said no. And there was anger and there was sadness because, once again, our voices had been ignored. Now in Fielding, our voices have been ignored for a long time. It's friendly Fielding to some people, not necessarily for all people. And I won't go into the history now of what our iwi across the Manawatū District Council rohe, many of our iwi, have suffered over the years. But I will make mention of Te Pene Raupatu, which is, I'm not sure if you've heard of Raupatu, but Raupatu is the confiscation of lands. For Ngāti Kauwhata, that confiscation took place via a pen. We lost so much of our land through confiscation for various reasons. For instance, there was some land in Fielding that Ngāti Kaupata were leasing to a couple of farmers called Whisker and Hugh. They fell behind in their bank loan, and so the bank took our land off them when it was ours in the first place. So there's a multitude of things like that have happened. Our people have been taken from their maraes, pepper potted throughout Fielding, not together because they didn't want us to be living together. They spread us out throughout Fielding and created isolation. That isolation, and they worked really well. What they wanted to do, they succeeded in that because our whānau became disconnected. We became, from what we were once thriving, we became less thriving. Anyway, over the years, as I said, our voice has been not heard. When we looked at the Manawatū District Council, they weren't people that looked like us. They couldn't pronounce our names. They'd never heard of our marae. That was just some place where the Maoris go. They weren't quite sure what it was. We've had, before Bridget, we've had one Māori councillor, Barbara Cameron, in the however many 100 years that there's been a Manawatū District Council. So you can imagine our anger when the Manawatū District Council then voted no to a Māori ward. As Richard said, it doesn't take away from anybody else, but it was going to give us a voice. So that night, there were lots of phone calls made that night. And we rang Debbie Ngaruapeka, told her what had happened, and we said, we're going to have a hikoi. And she said, okay, well, let's have a hui. So Debbie and Andrew Judd came to a hui that we had, and we all got, all our marae came together to this hui that we held in Fielding, and we talked about what we were going to do. We decided that we needed to have a hikoi very quickly, to draw attention to what had happened to us. And the other thing that we decided, I'd mention Ngā Manu Taiko, which was a group within the council. At that hui, we decided that Ngā Manu Taiko would leave the Manawatū District Council and that we would not go back until they gave us a voice within their council. So various things happened, conversations, and then on Tuesday the 10th, I think, of May it was, we had our hikoi. Now, we'd been making placards. There'd been a few newspaper reports made, and we were thinking, oh, God, if we can get 30 people, let's get a group of 50 people. Let's get 50 people. That'd be great. And we were really excited about when we found out that more and more people were coming, and we thought we might just get to the 50 number. In the morning, we went to South Street, and there were over 500 people gathered there. And it wasn't just Māori. There were people from the church. There were people who had come from Palmerston North. There were people from all cultures who came that day to that hikoi. And we walked through town. We walked to the Manawatū District Council, and the mayor and some of the other councillors were waiting on the steps for us. And Meihana went and presented them with a letter that had been signed by all the members. Another side note is that at our hui we'd decided that we would form a new group called Te Kōtuirau, which is all the members, a representative from each marae, but very separate from the council and not reliant on the crumbs fed to us by the council. Anyway, Meihana handed Helen a letter telling her that we were removing ourselves from council and that we would not be back until we had a voice. There were various hui had over that day, and over the next 2 weeks, I think it was. Some of the councillors came to South Street and had a discussion with us. They gave other options for us, which we declined. And I think Alison Short, I don't know the name of it, but Alison Short and some of the other councillors did something which meant that they could have another vote, that the councillors could have another vote. So 2 weeks later, we all went to the Manawatū District Council again, and the councillors voted a second time. And this time, they changed their vote, and we were able to have a Māori ward, Ngā Tapu Wai o Manawatū. We knew that now that we had this Māori ward, we had to get a very special person, because, and I'm not being mean when I'm saying this, but when Māori do things, we're always held to a higher standard than other people. So our councillor couldn't just be Tom, Dick or Harry off the street. Our councillor had to be smart, our councillor had to be outspoken, our councillor had to be eloquent, and our councillor had to be able to read, because there were lots of reading to be done. Anyway, we found somebody who fit the bill, Bridget, and had the vote, and Bridget became our first Māori Ward councillor. The difference that Bridget has made to Māori within the Manawatū District Council Rohe has been amazing. And I've got a list here of just to list some of the things that have happened in Manawatū District Council since Bridget has been our Māori Ward councillor. So we have our first ever, Manawatū District Council has their first ever marae hapu policy, and part of that policy means that we get a councillor, every marae has a councillor who's their liaison person, and it's that councillor's job to advocate and promote the interests of their marae they're attached to, and to source resources. At Aorangi Marae, I think the councillors have been enjoying it. It's been a bit of a slow process because sometimes things move slowly. They move as slowly or as quickly as we want them to. And also it's been getting used to people that we don't know and them getting used to us. So it's working not too bad. It's in its early stages. Our councillor came to the opening of our marae last year, had never been to a marae before, to any marae, let alone our marae. Other councillors went to the opening of Te Here Marae last year as well. So that's one thing that's happened since Bridget has been our Māori Ward councillor. Manawatū District Council has a youth council, and our Māori youth have never been engaged with it. It hasn't really been for them, they're not really interested in it. Now not only do we have Māori rangatahi in that youth council, but the deputy and the chair are both Māori. We have the Manawatū District Council has community awards, and last year there was a unanimous decision by all elected councillors for those awards to be received by Auntie Pepe Gotti and Uncle Dennis Emery. It's the first time that there's been a unanimous decision. And I know a lot of what I'm saying is actually part of, I talked about Bridget's skills. The way Bridget talks to people, she can, I don't know, she can sell, I don't know, she can sell lots of things very well. I lost my train of thought there. Anyway, that was beside the point. Other things we've now had 2 Matariki days with mana whenua, supported by the council, so the council have attended those. There's been a hauora day at Kauvata Marae, also supported by councillor. We have an infrastructure fund for marae and hapu development. Never had it before. There are 17 rural communities, I think they call them villages, I think it's 17, within the Manawatū District Council area. And for 14 years, they have been getting infrastructure and community committee funding. Last year, the marae got that funding as well for the first time ever. The Treaty Principles Bill, was it this year? End of last year? This year? The Manawatū District Council voted unanimously to support the Treaty to vote against the Treaty Principles Bill. Sorry. To vote against the Treaty Principles Bill. But the reason they chose to do that was to support and protect the interests of mana whenua within the Manawatū District Council Rohe. These are things that have never ever happened before. Haven't even been aware of us before, and now they're coming to realise some of what goes on in our communities. The second Māori Ward vote that took place, the Māori Wards bill vote that took place last year, this time around there was an 11 for, 1 against vote, which was a big turnaround from the previous debacle. We've introduced, the Manawatū District Council has introduced their first policy in Papakainga, and we've won the Significance and Engagements Policy, which also for the first time recognises Māori, Whaikaha, Rangatahi and Kaumātua, not only recognised but also embedded in the policy. Also in the long-term engagement plan, our marae have been engaged in that. So the long-term engagement plan previously for all of us was something, I mean there might have been the odd individual who would engage in it, but generally Māori in our area didn't. Our marae definitely didn't engage in those areas. Last year, we all put in submissions, we all engaged, we all turn up to the little submissions, hearing things, and we're actually getting quite good at it. Where's Fran? She's a gun. But it's been the change that Bridget has made, all these changes. There's lots of other things too that I haven't mentioned. But one of the main things is that our tamariki now, our tamariki and people and mokopuna, they see Bridget, they see Whai Debbie, they see Rowley, and they say, oh, there's Auntie. And now it's something that they can aspire to. That's not a place where only Pākehās go there. It's not a place for Māoris. It's a place for them. They see it as a place for them. They've become familiar with it, and they will grow up, their children, ensuring that their children are part of that as well. So let's give Bridget and Whai Debbie and Rowley a big paki. So the reason we want people to vote yes to Māori Wards is because, as Richard said, it doesn't take away from anybody, but it's given us so much, things that we have never had before. So if you are not sure whether to vote for a Māori Ward, please change your mind tonight. Vote yes to a Māori Ward. Encourage your whānau to vote yes for a Māori Ward, your friends, whoever throughout the country. Please encourage them to vote yes to a Māori Ward. Kia ora rā.
Tēnā koe whaia, mohi wana hau e whakapau kaha ana koe ki te tautoko i ngā tangata katoa i roto i tō ao. He tuara koe mō tō whānau, mō tō hāpore. O tira, he tuara anō hoki koe mōku kei roto i enei momo horopaki. Ka rongoa hau i tō āhua, i tōku taha, nā reira, i kaha ke taku tū. Tēnā koe. I think that was such an awesome example that you gave as well of how you guys work to organise that hikoi, and it just goes to show that when decisions like that are made, we don't just have to sit down and take it if we don't agree with it. We can get together and we can get involved and we can show that we don't agree. I think a lot of the time we may think it's too difficult or what's it going to do, we can't change anything, but as that example shows, we can. And Bridget, e hoa, I'm glad you can read, or we would have missed out on all of that awesome mahi that you do. And same for you, Whai Debs, and all of our Māori Wards. I think that really highlights the importance or the massive difference that the Māori Wards make in strengthening that connection between, local councils or the communities and Māori communities, and what we've been missing out on if those were taken away. Nā reira, e mihi ana ki a koe. Up next, we have Dr. Matt Wynyard. Matt Wynyard is an uri of no Ngāti Maniapoto e Ngāpuhi. He's a senior lecturer in sociology at Te Kūninga ki Pure Huroa Massey University, where he teaches courses on sociological theory, racism and colonisation. Matt's research focuses on the role that Indigenous lands and natural resources play in contemporary agricultural systems, the treaty settlement process in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and disaster sociology. Matt will be speaking about the treaty settlement process and drawing on his research to explain the persistent myth of so-called Māori privilege. Tēnā koe.
Thanks very much. Kia ora koutou. Brilliant. Kia ora koutou, ko Matt Wynyard tōku ingoa. Good evening, everyone. My name's Matt. I just wanted to start by thanking everyone for coming out tonight. It's cold, I think it's raining, I think I could hear that on the roof. And also thank you to the organisers and the volunteers who've made this possible. So today I'm here to speak in favour of Māori Wards, but I'm not actually going to say much, if anything, about the wards themselves. Instead, I am going to speak to you about the broader myth of Māori privilege that seems to me to underpin much of the argument against the wards. So in so doing, I'm going to be drawing on my experience as a former Crown historian with the Office of Treaty Settlements at the Ministry of Justice. So I'm going to start by outlining how the settlement process came into being. I will then talk a little bit about the various breaches that the Crown has since acknowledged and apologised for. And I will finish by discussing the various forms of redress that are provided to settling iwi. The point that I'm trying to make here tonight is that far from being some kind of gravy train, the treaty settlement process can better be understood as a monumental act of grace and generosity on behalf of Māori. And I have to apologise, the first little part of this is a little bit sort of wonky and tricky, but yeah, here goes anyway. In 1975, in response to wide-ranging Māori protests, the then Labour government established the Waitangi Tribunal as a permanent commission of inquiry empowered to investigate Crown breaches of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and in some cases also to recommend the return of land. Initially, the tribunal was only able to examine contemporary claims, but a law change in 1985 extended its powers to hear claims dating back to 1840. At about the same time, in the mid-1980s, the then Longi-led Labour government was implementing a wide-ranging neoliberal reform process, and that included the potential privatisation of Crown land. As the tribunal cannot recommend the return of privately owned land, that would have meant the privatisation would have meant that Crown land was beyond the reach of Māori claimants even before the process had started. That prompted the Māori Council to take a case to the Court of Appeal, which directed the Crown to ensure that the transfer of lands was consistent with the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and that indeed is where the idea of treaty principles first comes from. Would-be buyers of Crown property were notified that the land was potentially subject to a claim, and if a claim was successful, the tribunal was given the power to make a binding recommendation that the land be returned to Māori. And to this date, however, the tribunal has never used its binding powers, even after being directed to by the High Court on 2 separate occasions and by the Court of Appeal. Instead, Māori claimants are pushed into direct negotiations with the Crown through the Office of Treaty Settlements. Now, a lot of people, and this includes myself right up until halfway through the first week that I was working there, assumed that the Office of Treaty Settlements is actually part of the Waitangi Tribunal, but in actual fact it's a completely separate entity that was established to enter into direct negotiations with and to settle the treaty claims of iwi and other collectivities that the Crown refers to as large natural groupings. Between 1985 and an arbitrary Crown-imposed deadline of September 2008, the Tribunal received more than 2,500 claims, cataloguing the Crown's myriad breaches of the treaty. The treaty settlement process that settles these claims also formally extinguishes the rights of Māori to seek any further redress or indeed to make use of the Tribunal's binding powers. The first settlements began in the early 1990s, 1992 I think to be specific, and since then some 75 groups have settled with the Crown. Through this process, the Crown has acknowledged and apologised for hundreds of egregious acts and omissions, including the summary execution of enemy combatants, the rape and molestation of women and girls at Parihaka, wrongful arrests and detention without trial, wrongful execution, indefinite detention, unjustified invasion and occupation of Māori land, the desecration of the bodies of enemy combatants and the use of mass graves, the killing of unarmed women, children and elderly people, looting, destruction, ransacking and the use of scorched earth tactics, and the indiscriminate confiscation of millions of acres of land. And I'm very sad to say that this is by no means an exhaustive list. By way of redress for these and countless other breaches of the treaty, the Crown typically provides acknowledgements and an apology, cultural redress such as name changes for particularly significant sites or the protection of sacred areas, as well as financial redress, which takes the form of cash quantum and, for example, the right of first refusal to purchase surplus Crown land at market prices. In many cases, the settlement process is highly divisive. It pits different parts of communities against one another, and the process also delivers far less to Māori than would be available via the Tribunal's binding powers, and far less than the actual value of Māori losses. The Crown knows that, and settling Māori into that process knowing that too. Between 1993 and 2001, the total value of treaty settlements was 2.24 billion New Zealand dollars, which is a significant amount, no doubt. But it is just a drop in the bucket, just 0.16% of total Crown expenditure over the same period, which has been estimated at 1,322 billion. Indeed, settling iwi typically receive just 1 or 2% of their actual losses in a process that also extinguishes any right to claim any further redress. For me then, these settlements can be seen as a monumental act of goodwill, of grace and of generosity on behalf of Māori, who are in effect writing off the majority of their losses in the spirit of reconciliation. In the light of such humility and such sacrifice, I think reserving space for Māori participation in local democracy is the very least that we can do. Thanks very much.
Tēnā koe, Matt. I think some of those things are quite hard to hear, but I think it's incredibly important that we do understand the historical treatment that Māori have undergone in the political landscape of New Zealand, and also to understand the fact that we still hear some of these things today in terms of special treatment and that Māori Wards are special treatment, and understanding that that's not the case, and having some things in our back pocket that we can use to counter those arguments is so important. Nā reira, tēnā koe, tēnā koe. Up next, we have June Nicklin. June Nicklin is a descendant from Te Tai Rāwhiti who was raised in Te Papai Oia within Rangitāne Whenua. She is a senior advisor Māori and kaiarahi tiriti at Te Kūninga ki Pūrehuroa Massey University. Grounded in kaupapa Māori and relational leadership, she enables staff to locate themselves within Te Tiriti o Waitangi, deepening their understanding of Te Tiriti, affirming their responsibilities as tangata tiriti and tangata whenua, and realising their collective potential to honour Te Tiriti as a daily deliberate practice. June will be speaking from the position of I tupu ake te pono I te whenua, the way that our Māori wards uphold the provisions of Te Tiriti and help to address the impact of 185 years of marginalisation, assimilation and colonisation. June says we need to look back to understand how to move forward, and dedicated Māori wards are not a special privilege, they are a bare minimum. Tēnā koe te tuakana.
Really hard to follow this, amazing panel here. But tēnā koutou katoa, me mihi ka tika ki te mana I tēnei whenua, ko Rangitāne ki a koe Bridget, Waimarama, Auntie Debbie, e te tuakana I konei, kei te mihi, mai tēnei Ngāti Pāhewera ki a koutou katoa. Yeah, as said, ko June Nicklin tōku ingoa, and I grew up here in Palmerston North. And I work at Massey University alongside some of our panellists here. I also wanted to express my gratitude to my mates on stage here. We share various connections and hononga together, which are all really underpinned by our commitment to Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And this is where I base my kōrero. I tipu ake te pono I te whenua, we must seek the truth from the whenua itself. The original storytellers, the holders of the narrative, ko te iwi Māori te rā, the sovereign nations here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Indigenous truths must be brought to light. So, as said, to move forward, we must first look back. We must be willing to tell the truth about our country's settler colonial past and the way in which Māori have been intentionally shut out of the decisions that affect our everyday lives. For over 173 years, Māori have experienced assimilation, marginalisation and underrepresentation in our own whenua. The upcoming referendum in Palmerston North and in 41 other rohe across Aotearoa, New Zealand, is not just about a Māori ward or constituency, it is about whether or not we are prepared to confront our settler colonial past and correct the course so that we can have a transformational future for our tamariki mokopuna. The promises of Te Tiriti whānau. So as my mate Richard here has just noted, Māori wards are not a special privilege, nor are they race-based. The truth of the matter is they are Te Tiriti based. Te Tiriti o Waitangi envisaged a way forward in which tangata whenua and tangata tiriti could actually come together and live together. I just want to provide a short overview on the articles, the provisions, what was actually written and agreed to in the Te Tiriti text, and the expressions or the principles of Te Tiriti that over 500 of our rangatira signed. Article 1 whānau, so this is for you all to listen up, ka pai, because this is the stuff we need to know about, which has often been hidden. So Article 1, and this comes from our Te Atakura Educator Network with our mentor Ronnie Tāwhai, who has helped to bring to light a lot of this information for us. Article 1 tells us that Māori were open and willing to accept a kawana, a leader to govern Pākehā. This speaks to our manaakitanga, our aroha, and the exemplary vision that our people had for us, but also for Pākehā too. Article 2 tells us that we would maintain what we had already stated and signed in He Whakaputanga o Te Rangatiratanga o New Tireni on the 28th of October 1835, that we would have absolute independence and autonomy and authority, tino rangatiratanga, over our whenua, our kāinga and our tonga. Article 3 tells us that we would be granted the same rights as Pākehā, nā tikanga katoa rite tahi, but not the David Seymour kind, and this would be expressed as equity, equal outcomes, access and participation and options. Article 4, nā whakapono katoa me te ritinga Māori, it tells us that we would continue to have religious freedom and our spiritual practices would be honoured. So using what I've just mentioned as a basis for analysis, Māori Wards are linked to Article 3, the provision of ngā tikanga katoa rite tahi, and can be expressed by the principles of equity, access and participation. So this is how Māori Wards link into the foundational statement in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. What Te Tiriti didn't promise, it did not promise subjugation, it did not promise second-class citizenship, yet here we are in 2025, still fighting for a seat at the table, a table that was made from the rākau of our ngāhere. So the Māori Ward context, some are saying that Māori Wards are divisive or separatist, and my mate has already sort of talked about that loosely. But the same logic is never applied to the likes of rural wards. I can't seem to make sense of that. Isn't it more divisive to shut Māori out, to deny representation in our own lands? Does it make sense to have non-Māori, who perhaps don't speak te reo Māori, representing the young rangatira in Te Papaioia that speak te reo Māori? How would one even do that? Is it ethical and is it appropriate? Māori Wards are important for us as parents of tamariki Māori, especially the ones that speak te reo Māori, because we need representation that represents our aspirations, our dreams and our hopes. In 2019, only 13 of 78 councils had even one Māori councillor. Māori are 17% of the population, but only 7% of elected councillors. In 2021, championed by Nanaia Mahuta, the requirement for referendums was removed. The number of Māori wards increased from 3 to 49. That's a 1,500% increase. And so that tells us that the moral compass of this nation is shifting in a more positive direction. Fast forward to 2025, and 42 councils are being forced into referendums to keep Māori wards, even though, we voted to keep them. This referendum process is not neutral, it's not democratic. It has been proven that referendums disadvantage Māori for a range of different reasons, and we need your help. So this is the call to action, whānau. This is where we do some mahi. This kōrero is not just to inform, it is a call to remind you that we, tangata whenua, tangata tiriti, we all have work to do. To enrol, to speak up, to vote, and to support Māori Wards with the power of the pen, the power of your voice, the power of your whakapapa, and your belief in what is tika, truth, and what is pono, correct. Truth, actually, I did that the wrong way around. Anyway, whānau, if we want kotahitanga, it must be grounded in aroha and collective decision-making. If we want justice, systems that no longer serve us must be dismantled and reimagined. And if we want to honour the promises of Te Tiriti, affording Māori a seat at the table is the bare minimum. Māori Wards are not divisive or performative, they are constitutional, they are ethical and meaningful expressions of justice. By enabling dedicated representation, Māori Wards are a practical step towards fulfilling the commitments already in Te Tiriti. And in the wise words of Papa Moana Jackson, treaties aren't meant to be settled, they're meant to be honoured. Nā reira, kua tai te wā, now is the time. Toi tū te whakaputanga, toi tū te tiriti, toi tū paratinia, toi tū te mana Māori motuhake. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou koutou.
Tēnā koe te tuakana, i rongo kōrero a hau, i mua i tō taua hui, he pāna i tō kaha i tō maia i mohiwana a hau, o he pono te kōrero. Ka tū koe hei tauira mōku me pēwhia te wahine Māori tūkaha ai roto i te ao Pākehā. Nā reira, pēki mihi ki a koe. What an awesome discussion. I think it's really awesome as well to understand how Māori wards tie into te tiriti, and also the fact that, we don't highlight Māori rural wards in the hope that they go to referenda, but also it's just our sincere hope that Māori wards are treated in the same way that all other wards are ne. Nā reira, tēnā koe. Up next we have Professor Mohan Dutta. Professor Dutta is an internationally renowned communications scholar and director of Massey University's Centre for Culture-Centred Approach to Research and Evaluation, where he works with others to develop culturally centred, community-based projects for social change. Mohan is a champion of the power of advocacy and activism in challenging poverty, marginalisation and human oppression. Professor Dutta is the winner of the 2016 International Communication Association Public Policy Communication Research Award and the 2018 Outstanding Health Communication Scholar Award. He currently serves on the advisory panel of the World Health Organization Cultural Context of Health Group. Mohan will be speaking on the meaning of equitable political representation and the significance of te tiriti and dedicated Māori wards to non-Pākehā tangata tiriti. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora koutou katoa. Salam alaikum, ni hao, namaskar. I stand before you today on this whenua of Manawatū as a scholar, a community member, but I will speak mostly as a migrant of color, to speak to you about the transformative power of Māori wards in our local councils. I address you as partners in this shared journey toward justice, equity, and a future where I hope, and we all hope, that all voices are heard. As a starter, as someone who studies the question of voice, I will argue that when voices of tangata whenua are heard, democracy is strengthened, not reduced or weakened. In Aotearoa, any question of voice must begin with and center itself in te tiriti. Te tiriti is, as many of our colleagues here have articulated, not a historical document. It is a living commitment to partnership, protection, and participation. It guarantees Māori tinuranga tirotanga, sovereignty, and self-determination. But it also does something else for us migrants. It invites us as settlers, including us migrants of color, as settlers of color, to coexist in a relationship of mutual respect and shared responsibility. Māori wards in our local councils are a tangible expression of this partnership. They ensure that Māori voices, perspectives, and knowledge systems are not just included, but are central to decision-making. This is not about exclusion, it's the opposite. It is about honoring the promise of te tiriti, which lays the foundation for democracy in Aotearoa based on generosity. Without Māori generosity in signing te tiriti, none of us would have the opportunity to call this land home, certainly not us migrants. Voting for Māori wards is a way to honor that generosity and uphold the principles of justice that emerge from and that are embedded in te tiriti. Now let us turn to a concept that is often talked about in this disinformation ecosystem, the concept of equity, which is often turned on its head. Equity is not about giving one group more than another. It is about creating a level playing field where everyone has a fair chance to thrive, recognizing historical marginalization. For nearly 200 years, Māori have been systematically marginalized in local governance. Māori voices, as we have heard, have been sidelined by structures rooted in colonial whiteness, the underpinning values of white culture taken as universal. Māori wards address this injustice by ensuring dedicated representation for Māori, just as rural wards, as has been pointed out, ensure representation for rural communities. So how is it that we have two different rules, two different conversations, and perhaps whiteness provides us something instructive about the ways in which we can read this? This is not special treatment, it is a correction of historic imbalances, and I'm not a historian. Equity, most importantly, benefits us all because it strengthens our democracy. When Māori perspectives shape policies on housing, health, education, and the environment, the outcomes reflect the needs of our diverse communities, including those of us as migrants of color. Māori wards benefit entire communities by fostering inclusive decision-making that uplifts everyone. As migrants of color, we feel we can belong. Māori wards have deepened relationships and trust between councils, iwi, hapu, and Māori generally, and we have heard about that. They empower resilient communities, and we have seen examples of these where community responses to emergencies and crises are strengthened because of their stronger relationships with marae. Māori diversity is a taonga, a treasure that enriches Aotearoa. Māori are not a monolith. The vibrant diversity of iwi, hapu, and whānau, each with unique histories, languages, and aspirations, shape the cultural, social, and economic textures of communities and offering inspiration for diverse communities. From Ngāti Raukawa and Ngāti Kaupata to Rangitane in Manawatū, this diversity brings wisdom and innovation to our councils. Māori knowledge systems, Mataranga Māori, offer solutions to challenges like climate change, community health, and social cohesion, grounded in centuries of connection to land, which for many of us have been erased systematically. As migrants of color, we bring with us our own diverse cultures, histories, and struggles, often understanding what the pain of erasure is. Supporting Māori wards allows us to celebrate this shared diversity, this shared collection with histories of colonialism, to weave our stories together, and to build a Manawatū where our children see themselves reflected in the leadership of this land. The generosity of Māori leadership in councils builds spaces for upholding the diversity of our many cultures. Māori wards offer support for the recognition that culture is a strength and not a weakness, and that we benefit when we celebrate culture. Now let us confront a dangerous barrier to this celebration of difference: disinformation. You may have heard claims, and Richard has already addressed this, that Māori wards are race-based or akin to apartheid. My research on the role of disinformation and democracy demonstrates that this is a deliberative, what I call in my work, communicative inversion, which is the use of rhetoric and communication to turn reality on its head. A tactic where the language of justice is twisted to sow division. And for those of us that have experienced colonialism, this is an age-old colonial trick: divide and rule. Those who use terms like apartheid to describe Māori wards are not only misrepresenting history, but are weaponizing fear and anxiety intentionally, and this is part of a global far-right ecosystem to undermine Te Tiriti and indigenous rights, because it gets in the way of extractive processes of capitalist extraction. Apartheid was a system of racial segregation and oppression. Māori wards, by contrast, are treaty-based, based on generosity, based on welcoming all. They're designed to uphold the very ideas of partnership and equity, the opposite of apartheid. This disinformation often stems from far-right narratives that frame equity as a threat, ignoring the evidence that Māori wards strengthen community cohesion. As migrants of color, we know the sting of disinformation, the stereotypes, the scapegoating, the marking of the outsider. And yet, we are the ones often targeted by being told that giving rights to Māori take away from migrant rights. We must reject this divisiveness, these lies that see Māori wards in opposite of what they really are. Many of us from post-colonial spaces should be able to recognize the age-old colonial strategy of divide and rule. So I say to my fellow migrants of color, I speak to you from the heart. Many of us have come from places where colonial legacies, racism, and exclusion have shaped our lives. Here in Aotearoa, we have a chance to build something different in partnership with Tangata Whenua, a society where the original promise of Te Tiriti is realized and that offers a global model for what partnership could look like, where Māori are honored as Tangata Whenua and where our diverse communities thrive together. Voting for Māori wards is not just about supporting Māori, it is about standing against the same systems of marginalization that have affected us historically. It is about saying no to the white supremacist undercurrents that fuel disinformation, and yes to a future where equity is the foundation for democracy. In Manawatū, the voices of Tangata Whenua remind us that Māori Wards are not a privilege, but a right rooted in te tiriti, secured, as we have heard, through struggle. As migrants, we can amplify these voices. We can stand in support and in solidarity with these voice infrastructures. By voting for Māori Wards, we send a message that we value partnership and we reject divisiveness, that we reject the rhetoric of referendums designed to silence Māori, and that we are committed to a Manawatū where everyone's mana is uplifted. And I wrap up. Māori Wards are not just about representation, they are about our shared humanity, our collective liberation, and our commitment to justice. Let us honor te tiriti, let us create and continue to support an Aotearoa where all of us, Māori, Pākehā, migrants of color, can sing our songs free from the ropes of injustice. Let us collectively recognize that we are all here because of the invitational power of te tiriti. I am because te tiriti. Ngā mihi nui ki a koto, tēnā koto katoa.
Thank you so much for sharing with us and speaking to your perspective as a migrant of colour. That was incredibly interesting and incredibly insightful, and a very good reminder to not let the disinformation circling around divide us, and that we need to come together in this time. Tēnā koe, thank you. I think we're up to Q&A time. I didn't say that we had Q&A in the end, did I? But we are up to Q&A time. So what we're going to do is, our lovely Ben is here, ready to walk around and put the mic in front of your face so we can hear your pātai, your questions. But, so how it's going to work is you're going to, if you would like to ask a question, just raise your hand. I'll pick somebody and you'll get one question, okay? And please direct your question to one of our lovely speakers up here. And I know that we probably don't need this reminder, but just in case, please do keep all questions and discussions respectful. Ka pai? Who's first? Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, ka pai. Yep.
Kia ora te whānau, ko Rachel Bond tōku ingoa. It was to follow up on a point Richard raised, which was about the process through Justice Committee about how the Māori Wards legislation was handled. I know you wanted to say more about it, Richard, so please do.
Funny you should ask. If you made a submission on the amending legislation, you had 3 days to do it in. The Justice Select Committee, which heard this legislation, considered submissions for a week. It was a parliamentary recess. They whacked through the whole thing. Rachel, you'll know this, and I'm pretty sure it was like 28 days. It's a month. Standing orders in the New Zealand Parliament since 1986 have given parliamentary select committees, broadly speaking, around 6 months to process legislation. So that gives us time to consider submissions. We make the submissions. Heaps of us show up. We want to talk face to face, or maybe we don't, or maybe we do it by Zoom, whatever. It's a really important part of the process. It doesn't always change the law. It quite often doesn't change the law, because the governments in Aotearoa New Zealand have the confidence of the House, they have the numbers, and so they will vote up or vote down committee reports. It kind of doesn't matter, but it's procedural. It's really important that people have the opportunity to go down there and have their say, either in person or digitally. This select committee whacked through that process very, very quickly. It did so against the advice of the Attorney General, Judith Collins, also not a well-known member of the Wokarati, who says the likelihood that Māori representation, which all of you have been talking about, and lots of you practice, especially those of you who can read, Attorney General acknowledges, as a member of the government, although in her capacity of Attorney General, it's a slightly different constitutional role, that the likelihood that faces like yours will sit at our council tables will fall. The government does this acknowledging that it has heard from the United Nations, which says that this legislation poses a threat to the political presence of Māori in local authorities. So it canes through the legislation, and on the day that the legislation receives the royal assent, the Minister of Local Government at the time, Simeon Brown, says this is a great day for democracy. Just one last thing, thanks for the question, Rachel. I want to go back to 2021 when Minister Manawatū was shepherding the legislation through the House, which did away with the possibility that 5% of us might require a referendum to be held on behalf of everybody else, the decision of which would be binding. Here is just a little excerpt from the National Party's submission to the then Parliamentary Select Committee, considering Minister Mahuta's legislation. How local government and iwi or hapu meet their treaty obligations should be up to them to decide. Local government and Māori are quite capable of doing that and achieving the outcome without the central government deciding the issue.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
Nā mi nui e ngā tuakana. I often have to find debating points to talk with people about this subject, and two arguments that always come back at me: that was 180 years ago, why are we still talking about this? And the second one is, why can't Māori just get voted into the general ward seats? Can I please have some counterpoints to give back to these people that are not on the waka yet?
Matt, eh? Should we give it to Matt? Sorry, this is what white professors do, they dominate proceedings. Well, Anzac Day was, how many years ago was Anzac Day? I don't know, I can't remember. Maybe we should just move on from that too. Maybe we should just forget that. Anzac Day still animates people. Half of us in the country roll out of bed at 6 o'clock in the morning for a thing that happened 100 and X years ago. It's in the past. Don't know why we can't move on from that. But we are quite selective about the parts of our history that we want to move on from and those that we cleave to. And anything to do with people who look like you, people who look like me, are desperately keen to move on from, which really is code for, I don't want to know this, I don't want to talk about this, this has no influence upon me, it's not relevant, I want to move on. As a Pākehā person who has spent quite a lot of time thinking about this, I want to know, what is the thing that you are moving on from? What is the thing that frightens you so badly that you have to move on from it? Because you're quite keen to stay with some stuff like Anzac or Gallipoli or our war veterans, but you want to move on from these other things. Also, some of you will know people, I say this as somebody who comes from Taranaki and whose family have farmed on land that we call confiscated, but actually it's stolen land. Can we call it what it is, please? It's statutory theft, which has been whitewashed essentially through a parliamentary process. There is a woman who lives up in Taranaki whose family have managed to maintain 50 acres of land, when once upon a time all of the land in that area, at the bottom of the Pangarehu Road, belonged to her whānau. That land is landlocked. In order to get onto that land, the whānau have to ask the permission of a Pākehā farmer who I went to school with to get onto land which they own. This happens up, down, left, right, across the motu. So this is a past that is not over. That's the first question. What was the second question? Why can't they stand in the general elections? 1867, we passed legislation that applies to Māori representation at the national parliamentary level. We have 4 parliamentary seats that are dedicated to Māori until 1996. Until 1967, if you are a Māori person, you cannot contest a European role. Until 1975, if you're a Māori person, you have to register on the Māori roll. You have no choice. So we have systematically designed ways in which we corral brown people into voting over here to prevent them from taking over our institutions. We do not elect brown people in general seats or in general wards. We just don't do it. Who would know why? Maybe because they don't look like us, maybe because we would quite like to move on from them, maybe because they frighten us, maybe because they keep us awake at night. The reason why Māori people are not elected in general seats and general wards has nothing to do with Māori people and everything to do with Pākehā or tangata tiriti.
Hi, I've heard from some Pākehā people who believe that they shouldn't vote to keep Māori Wards yes or no, because they feel it is not their place and that only Māori should be voting because they are overstepping otherwise. What do you say to them?
I agree with them, they're right, that, that it should be up to us to decide whether we have a Māori ward because it only affects us. But the issue is that this referendum is going to be judged on the number of people that vote for the Māori ward. So the Pākehā friends you have who choose not to vote are voting no to a Māori ward. One day, it might be just Māori who can decide whether or not we have a Māori ward, but for now, this is what we're stuck with. So please tell them to vote yes to a Māori ward because a no vote, if they don't vote, it's a no.
I don't really know who this is to, so yeah, come fight amongst yourselves. Though, to the dude in the back, only 3 councillors for PNCC in the last 150 years have been Māori until the Māori wards came in, which is pretty blatant. But my question to the panel was this. Obviously there's lots of really passionate supporters, which is great, but is it true that there's quite low voter turnouts in Palmerston North, and is there anything we need to know in that space for people who are in favour of this and want to help?
I'll take this one, shall I? Ka pai. So the 2022 local elections in Palmerston North, the voter turnout was 36.7%, right? Which is incredibly low. I think, what we've talked about in terms of the upcoming referendum, it's incredibly important. So we can't make a change, we can't ensure that we retain our Māori wards if we aren't actually voting. A big barrier, I think, for a lot of people is the fact that our papers come in the mail, these pesky things that come in the mail, and then I guess I'll fill them out and then I have to get them sent back. And a lot of the time people just don't bother doing that because there can be a big disconnect between people and how local council affects their everyday lives, right? Without understanding the impact that local council does have towards people and their everyday lives. You turn on your water, it's local council, you go outside, you walk along the footpath, council, you go to a bus stop and you look at the light that might not be working well, council, the sports fields you play on, council. So understanding the importance of that and turning out to vote and having your say and electing people who represent you and represent your needs is incredibly important. But that message isn't communicated well to people, right? And there is a big disconnect. So what was the second part of your pātai, Iwa? Just how can people...
What can we do about it?
This, I think, is a really good example of what we can do. I think we can get more involved, not just get more involved before elections come about, when people get really racked up and rallied up and the media is putting more news out, but ensuring that we're doing more things in between elections where we can actually participate in democracy, where we can come together and have discussions on things like this, so that come election time, we're as informed and we are as prepared as we can be. Kia ora.
Hello. So I've been involved in a lot of community governance, and so in a kind of leadership position as well, and really push hard for a lot of diversity on the board. We do really well getting a lot of female representation, often more than male, which is awesome. A lot of different ethnicities, but one thing I've struggled with is getting a Māori perspective on the board. And kind of pushing for that too hard can sometimes feel like tokenism, especially coming from a non-Māori male. Just wondering whether there's any advice on how we should be going about this, or whether it's something we should be actively pushing for, or let it happen organically.
As one Pākehā bloke to another. Maybe I think wonder if we reframe this, and I say as one Pākehā bloke to another, but there is a sort of a piss take there, but there's also a serious point, which is that historically, including until contemporary circumstances, people like you and I, mate, have designed the rules, essentially. And Chelsea could go back over the history of Māori parliamentary representation, local level, central level, and look at ways in which the patterns of representation that occur are not a consequence of half-assed, lazy Māori people not wanting to put themselves forward for anything. It's a consequence of the way in which we institutionalise what we think of as normal. And what we think of as normal is people who look like us. Blokes, Pākehā people, New Zealand European blokes, whatever you want to call it. I think that there is a conversation that people like you and I need to have with ourselves about this. It doesn't really involve Māori people. It might involve our women and folk from beyond the binary, I don't know, but I think there's a conversation for blokes to have and for Pākehā people to be having as well about, in particular, about doing exactly the reverse of what I'm doing now, which is holding the microphone, talking. We are getting better, I think, at making room for other people, for maintaining silence, for not feeling that we have to exercise our God-given right to have an opinion on everything, and just kind of staying out of the way. But I think in order to do that even better, we need to rewrite some rules. That involves talking with people like us, ourselves. That's an internal conversation, I think. I mean, our Māori mates really don't need us coming to them to say, help us feel better about ourselves. That's not what you're doing, I appreciate that, but that's what heaps of Pākehā people do. I think there is something around people who occupy positions of power, and they tend to be people who look like me and to some extent you, and we need to have a bit of a conversation about how we change the rules of the game, which we largely control still, I think. I appreciate that's not remotely a direct response to what you had your direct question, because I'm not in a position to answer that. But I do think there is something about people who exercise positions of cultural, political, economic power reflecting on quite why things are so natural for us and so unnatural for other people.
Kia ora. Just to add on to that as well, I think the intention is beautiful, but it's understanding as well when Māori are on the board, how are they looked after and protected, because cultural safety is a big issue. I know for myself, I've been on boards, I've exited because the system isn't set up for me to be there. You know, I want to karakia, they won't let me karakia. So if the system is set up in a way where you have a discussion with tangata tiriti together, and then bring us into a conversation where we really know that the place in which we're coming into is safe, then absolutely let's work together. But that's where we want to get to, so I appreciate the pātai.
Hey, Richard.
Not too sure who to direct this question to, probably to Richard. Sorry, Richard, you're getting picked on a lot tonight. How does one explain to rangatahi/youth the importance of voting to keep Māori wards?
Because, I would like to think I'm a rangatahi still, but I don't think I can have that badge still, but I've been given that. Sorry, I thought this was going to Richard. Ehua, can you just repeat that question for me so I can answer properly?
What would you say to young people, rangatahi, about the importance of voting to keep Māori wards? Why should you care? Why should you do it?
I think that is quite a big pātai, I think, because we're focusing solely on speaking to rangatahi who are relatively disengaged within the political system. So I think it comes back to how do we re-engage rangatahi so that they are actually interested in these things and want to participate in local elections, in general elections. So how do we re-engage them? I think one thing that is quite difficult as well is that we don't do well in communicating with rangatahi on these matters. The lingo that are used in bills and legislation is also incredibly hard to understand, and it doesn't exactly make rangatahi interested when it comes to these matters. So I think it is a bigger issue when it comes to how do we engage with rangatahi in the first place when it comes to participating in local elections. One thing for me that I've really tried to push when I speak to rangatahi is that when they don't turn out to vote, it's like they are giving 2 votes to people who don't vote like them. When we have a look at our voter turnout, a lot of the time it's people who are 60 plus who may not look like them, who probably don't think like them, who are voting. So by them not voting, they are giving so much political power to that group. So I would really highlight to rangatahi the fact that they are giving a lot of kaha and a lot of say to that group who do not vote like them, but who are getting to have a huge say in how things go. Like when it comes to our Māori Ward referendums, we've kind of touched on the fact that from 2001 up until 2021, there was that pesky parole provision which said that 5% of electors, if they disagreed with the council's decision to establish Māori wards, they could sign a petition which would force a binding referendum. Now, I think if a lot of our rangatahi were to have engaged in those referendums back then, a lot of our Māori wards potentially could have been established. But that isn't the case because, you know, they are so severely under-engaged. So I would really highlight the fact that they are practically giving 2 votes to people who don't vote like them. Ka pai, tēnā koe.
Because I like adding on things, whānau. So if we think about the idea of it takes a village to raise a tamariki, there's multiple places in which we can influence our tamariki. I think within the schooling system, civic and political literacy is required. For our rangatahi to understand the political system, they've got to be taught in a way that is educational, informative, and the truth. So within the schooling system, I think it should be introduced, and that's a personal opinion of mine. But I also think if we, as Māori specifically, if we return to the way in which we used to wānanga, we would bring our tamariki here. I've brought my tama, he's here, but, you know, engaging our tamariki in these discussions, because it's not just for Pakeke, it's actually for everyone, and everyone includes our rangatahi. So getting our babies to these discussions, I think, is essential for them to understand and see the representation and see how working together as tangata whenua, tangata tiriti, and our migrant whānau actually works.
And also remind them that in about 20 years' time, 30% of them are going to be Māori, those are rangatahi. So they are going to exercise some serious political power and influence.
Kia ora. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for some really interesting kōrero and pātai this evening. Like Mohan, I raised this question as another migrant of colour. And I raised this question to draw attention to the fact that in this room today, there are not many migrants of colour physically present. That does say something about where migrants of colour might stand in relation to this issue. The sad truth is, the majority are more likely to buy into the rhetoric of equality rather than the tiriti, and feel like aligning themselves with values and ideologies that make them feel more white and less brown, because that is perceived as the route to success in this country that they want to make their home. They also come from contexts where the kinds of stratifications that shape those contexts will position them in relation to Māori in ways that don't work with equity. It works with majoritarian dominance. So my question to Mohan, as well as all of you here, is in leading up to what's coming up with this election, there's a lot of work to be done with those communities. Can we put our heads together to do that?
Kia ora, Sita. That's a really good point. And I think, there are two parts to this. One is sort of the whiteness of the overarching system that doesn't see migrants of color. So within that context, the white aspiring migrants feel that to belong to the system, one has to copy the tools and techniques of whiteness, if you will. And I think there are two-pronged strategy here in terms of really engaging in conversations with migrant communities, whether it is in dinner table conversations or in community groups and temples and mosques around this idea of systemic racism that creates these barriers for migrant communities and not tangata whenua, really turning the narrative on its head, if you will. But also, I think, I've been thinking quite a bit about this new act proposal about citizenship testing, right? And for as wild as it sounds, I think that there is something to be said in there about building Tetiriti-led education for new migrant communities right throughout the migration journey, and perhaps some kind of testing system or education system that actually evaluates your learning of Tetiriti when you're coming in as a new migrant. In the immediate context, though, I think that it's really important to have these conversations to debunk the disinformation like we have been doing, and to actually build grassroots communities and campaigns where migrants get to have conversations with tangata whenua, get to be in dialogue with tangata whenua, rather than getting their messages from these dominant white structures of the settler colonial apparatus. Thank you.
Check. Kia ora naka katoa. Me taki mau kōrero. My question is about tangata moana. And it follows on from Auntie's question as well. I think, are they at the table as well? This question for everyone.
Could you repeat your question for us, Ewa?
Just for tangata moana, are they at the table as well?
Tangata moana.
Tangata moana are always at the table because they're our tuakana. As people that live within Te Moana Nui a Kiwa, we have an inherent connection with one another through whakapapa. So tangata moana are always part of these conversations and very much part of the circles that we, sort of are within. In terms of other groups as well, migrant communities, there are collective communities that are doing a lot of work in the Tetiriti space. We've got Asians supporting tino rangatiratanga, we've got Africans supporting tino rangatiratanga, we've got the Pākehā Project, the treaty workers, Tau i Tautoko. There's a range of different communities across Aotearoa that are doing this work in relation to one another. So I think it's really important that we as well form those groups of people that we relate to, so that we can come together to make those sort of decisions around what is important for us within the, sort of the collective aspect of what tino rangatiratanga means for Māori in terms of te tiriti.
So just on that as well, the Pacifica community has been very staunch supporters of this campaign. Sunny Luvai from the Papaioia Pacifica Community Trust, speaking at one of our earlier events. Welcome to talk further with us about that.
Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. This is a question for June, first of all, but everyone else can join in. So this is obviously a polarising issue. It's an either-or proposition. And if I go out and talk to that other guy, he's going to take his position. He's going to be entrenched in his no to my yes. So, if we all go out here tomorrow and express ourselves and engage with people and say, vote to keep Māori Wards, I think the danger is that the danger's not that we can't change anything; it's that we're going to lock a lack of change into place. So I just want to know, how do we change the status quo? How do we avoid that adversarial dynamic? What's for us here today? What's the actual game plan? How are we going to change people's minds?
There's about 5,000 questions, my bro. Kia ora, Corey. I think there's heaps of dynamics there. I think for us as Māori specifically, centering ourselves back into our tuakiritanga, our identity and understanding our positionality here, I think that's essential to us to have the confidence to go out and have the discussions in the first place. We talk about this a lot in our Te Tiriti workshops. Ronnie Tawhai actually has a really good kōrero on Te Tiriti as part of the M9 kaupapa that's run up in Auckland, that's online. She talks about how you can have discussions about Te Tiriti with others. So we encourage people to know what they're talking about, to go in with aroha, and to also think about the whakapapa of who we're sort of engaging with as well. We're not out here to change people's minds. That is not the mission. The mission is to correct the mis and disinformation that has been placed on the table, and to visibilise Māori truth, which is why we sort of have these sayings like I te pua ki te pono i te whenua, because we've got to source the right sources of truth. So the conversations, there's courage that's required, there's confidence that's required, there's a healthy environment that must be nurtured to have these sorts of conversations. Having a conversation with your racist uncle at the dinner table during Christmas might not be the best idea. You've got kaita finish, the kids are around. So there's a range of different factors that have to be thought about really critically to understand how to have these conversations. But post our kōrero, Richard and I and anybody else, we're going to have some kawhi and kōrero conversations, and we'll sort out some days and times to have those, where any of you are welcome to come and just kōrero further to us, to start, to whakakaha ake your confidence to have these conversations, because they are essential, and we can't stand at the back anymore. The fence can no longer be sat on. If you're sitting on the fence, you're complicit in the harm. So everything we're doing is a process of eliminating harm to keep our babies safe. Ka pai? So that would be the key message, is to look after yourself when you are having those conversations, and think about the colonial myths that you know about, and maybe go on with those so that you can debunk some of those myths with them.
Can't stand up. G'day. I'm standing for council. I know Nelson is down the end there, and I would just like to make a statement around thank you, because I think these dialogues are really important. I've learnt a lot tonight, and I might have even changed some of my views, so I'd like to thank the group that's been speaking up in front, and unfortunately not enough of the communities here to hear what you had to say. But I'd like to say thank you very much, and I know where I stand now in terms of my position in standing for election, so thank you very, very much.
Is that our last question? Aware of time? One more.
I'm really interested because nobody's actually mentioned tonight the work that the Palmerston City Council have already been doing with the local iwi. There are partnership agreements that are already signed with the local iwi, and I had a little look at their website recently, and I thought, wow, they're doing a huge amount in this area. And so I thought, what is it that the Māori Wards can offer in conjunction with what the council are already doing with these signed agreements? And the signed agreements cover resource management, as well as every decision in council has to be done with this agreement with iwi in mind.
Thank you. Tēnā koe. Sorry, where was that person who was talking? Oh, lovely. Thank you. You're quite right. Within the Palmerston North City Council, we have a relationship, a kawanata, with rangitani or Manawatū, and we have a group within the council that is called Te Whiri Kōkō, and Te Whiri Kōkō is a group that rangitani have identified of people, let's say if we're talking about climate or sustainability or so forth, rangitani people who have knowledge in that area or an interest, they meet with the general managers of that particular committee, and decisions are made and discussed, and they contribute to that. There's a collaboration and a cooperation, and there's that sharing of mātauranga Māori, and I suppose it's a good way to help moderate their thinking as well, how people are, and I think it's very special. And Te Whiri Kōkō are across the council, so Palmerston North City Council, for a very, very long time. I've got to talk about the crest, if I can just digress a little. Of all the councils in the country, there are only 3 crests that have Māori and non-Māori standing next to each other or across each other as in a partnership, and Palmerston North has that, and in part it's because right from the beginning of the establishment of Palmerston North City, rangitani or Manawatū and the council developed a relationship that was positive, and that has since been fostered and grown and developed over time. And I think that, of course, we also have a rangitani or Manawatū committee, of which is made up of councillors as well as it's a committee of council and rangitani mana whenua. And so issues are brought there and we meet quarterly to discuss things. So things are always brought to the table and discussed, and I think it's really healthy and positive, and the outcomes are positive. Yeah, I hope that's answered your question, but we're really thrilled with that relationship. Thank you.
Ka pai, I think that's us. Nōku te whiwhi kia whai wāhi, kia noho tahi ki o koutou taha i te pōnei. Sometimes my brain was working overtime because I was like, I'm going to have to summarise this kōrero when I stand back up. And I was just listening to all the awesome chats, though. That was so cool. Thank you guys so much. Thank you all for coming and making this event so awesome, and all of your awesome pātai. I really hope you guys have taken something away from tonight, and how could you not have? But I think the main thing to remember is that this doesn't really mean anything if we're not voting. And we also, you're all here because you're all relatively engaged already near. You all kind of have you're all engaged to some extent within what's happening, but it's important that we have these conversations when we go back home with our whānau and with our friends and with people who maybe aren't too aware of what's happening, who aren't aware that the local elections are even coming up, who aren't aware that they need to make sure that they, that their papers are coming via mail, and they're going to get these weird voting papers that they might have to send off again at some point. So please make sure that when you leave this room, you share the information that you've learnt tonight. Ka pai? Tēnā koutou. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hand back over to Whaia Debbie to wrap us up, to wrap us up with a karakia. Kia ora. Put this in here, or do you want to hold it?
Tēnā koe Chelsea, nei rā te mihi nanui ki a koe, nā te mea e hara ko tēnei he mahi māma, engari nau anō i tautoko i ngā kai kōrero katoa. Just saying to Chelsea, thank you very much for her skillful way of making sure she engages everyone and listening to everyone. Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Richard. Ngā mihi ki a koe whai Hinemoana, Matt, June, nei rā te mihi ki a kōrua ngā mana wahine, Mohan, thank you very much. This has been an informative, educative and interesting discussion this evening. And I just want to reiterate, thank you everyone for coming out. It's wonderful. I feel like my weekend's really going to start in earnest, and this is even after the kapahaka. That was fantastic. The karakia that I'll finish with is one that you may know, and if you do, by all means join in, but it talks about listening to the birds, the sound of the birds, the breeze that goes through the trees. It talks about listening from above, below, within and around, and also with the hope that we can hear things that help us resonate with others and connect authentically. Whakarongo ake au ki te tangi a te manu a te mātui. Tui, 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 tui a. Tui a i runga, tui a i raro, tui a i roto, tui a i waho. Tui a ki te here tangata. Ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao. Tūturu whakamaua kia tīna. Haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Tēnā koutou e ngā mihi ki ngā karaua, ngā kaumātua I konei aroha mai, nōku te hea kāri au I mihi atu I te tuatahi. Engari tēnā koutou. I'm just acknowledging our kaumātua and kuia who are here also, offering their support and their wisdom. Tēnā koutou. Kia ora everyone. Have a great night and great weekend. And those coffee sessions sound really good.
Yes. If you are interested in that, there's going to be, so when you're on your way out, if you want to be more involved, so keep Māori Wards Manawatū were the ones who established this awesome kaupapa tonight. So please make sure, if you want to get involved, fill out the sheet up front where you can volunteer. They do so much awesome mahi. And also the kawhi and kōrero that June was talking about. If you are interested in being a part of that, there's a little sign-up sheet as well up the front where you can put your details. Ka pai tēnā koutou, kia pai te pō, kia pai te wekini. Yeah, sure.